They say that in life the only two certainties are death and taxes. Well, in reef keeping the only two certainties are algae and tank noise. But in today's video I'm going to show you how to set up the quietest possible saltwater aquarium for your home office or bedroom. And I'll do so by walking you through my 150 litre water box tank with a sump, which I set up 8 months ago and which I've gone through a lot of trial and error with, so I'll talk you through what has and hasn't worked. Now, this isn't a sponsored video and I've bought almost everything you'll see myself, and when I get to it I'll tell you the one piece of kit I was given for free. And if it's your first time here and you want a new reefing video every week, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out when I upload. Firstly then, you'll need to choose a tank. I'm basing this video on a tank with a sump as that's much harder to get running silently. A small all-in-one tank without a sump, like the Fluval Evo 13.5 or the Waterbox mini tanks, are easier to get quiet because they run less equipment, they don't have water moving up and down through plumbing, and the equipment they do need is much smaller. But with a sumped tank, when it comes to silence, the smaller the better, and you might struggle with noise on anything much larger than a Red Sea Reefer 170, which is a little smaller than 2 feet cubed. My water box is a Frag 55.2, which is 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep and 16 inches tall. Anything larger will require stronger pumps to move more water, and bigger pumps are generally more noisy. The plumbing is also a consideration here, and you'll ideally want a tank with a gate valve on the main drain pipe. Plumbing pipes build up a layer of biofilm over time, which reduces the speed at which water can pass through. When that happens, the plumbing makes a splashing or gurgling noise, so you'll need to open the valve slightly to silence the tank again. You can do that on Red Sea Reefer tanks with the diaphragm valve, but it's not as accurate as a gate valve, and it can take you several frustrating attempts over a few days to get the level correct. So it's a great idea to either install your own gate valve or choose a tank that comes with a gate valve as standard, like the Waterbox range. When it comes to lights, ideally you want to avoid fans as they are what makes the noise, especially over time as they clog with dust. So you can either choose a T5 unit that doesn't have fans, or go for passively cooled LED lights like the Philips Coral Care, ATI Straton, or bars from the likes of Tunzi, Orfec, Reef Factory or Reef Bright. However, any light is of course turned off at night, so this is less of a consideration for a bedroom tank where silence is most important at sleepy time. And I chose to take the risk on a light with a fan after a bit of research to check which lights people found to be silent. Initially I went with a Red Sea Reef LED 90, which does make some noise, but I could only ever hear it if I listened hard. And recently I've been given a Reef Factory Flare Pro, which is the only piece of equipment in this video I didn't buy myself. Now, I've only had it a week, but the fan has yet to come on, so it is completely silent. But whatever light you choose, the key here is to oversize it and run it at lower percentages to keep the LEDs as cool as possible so the fans don't come on. And I've been running both lights at 40% intensity, something I wouldn't have been able to do with a smaller light. Moving on to filtration then, and this is a tricky one as you have to make compromises. A good DC skimmer like the Deltec range will run very quiet indeed, but in my opinion not quite quiet enough when you're in a room like an office or certainly a bedroom that is otherwise silent. So I've chosen to go for an algae refugium and a Clarity filter roller instead. The refugium is powered by passively cooled Tunzi 8831 lights which make no noise, and while the Clarity does make some noise when the motor turns, it's subtle enough not to bother me, although it might not be the best choice for a bedroom tank if you're a light sleeper because it will go off in the middle of the night, although in my opinion it's unlikely to disturb your slumber. The Tunzi refugium lights also have the benefit of being waterproof, so they can sit deep inside your sump, which will reduce light spill. That's not an issue for an office tank, but it might bother you having a purple glow in your bedroom. So you can either go for an algae reactor or take steps to stop the light escaping from your cabinet. Moving on to flow then, and this has been the area that's involved the most trial and error for me. I started with an oversized 8,000 litre per hour DC return pump from Jecod, which I ran at its lowest setting of 30%, and while it was pretty quiet I could still hear it. So I switched to two Jecod MDC 2000 litre per hour pumps which I run at 50% each, and now I can never hear them unless I have my head in the sump cabinet right next to the pumps. And the key here is choosing smaller DC pumps and running them at a relatively low power output. You might find the likes of the Vectra S2 or Reef Octopus pumps to be silent, but I haven't tried them on this setup, so I can't tell you. And the other leg of flow, powerheads, is where I've ended up spending the most money. I first tried two Jecod 15,000 litre per hour pumps running at 10% power, but even then I found them to be far too buzzy, so I upgraded to two Tunzi 6095s, which are rated at 9,500 litres per hour, which is 2,500 gallons per hour for all you Imperial fans. But they were even worse and were a constant distraction. So in the end I settled on two AI Nero 5s, which come in at 3,000 gallons per hour or just under 12,000 litres per hour. I actually initially tried a Nero 3, but I found it was only silent up to around 40%, which didn't produce enough flow for the tank. Now I never hear the Nero 5s at 50% or less, and I set them to go up to 100% when I'm out of the room in the evening to give the tank a much needed blast of flow. And the Neros are the quietest powerheads I've ever had, including various Jecod pumps and various MP10s and MP40s, so I would strongly recommend the Neros if silence is your priority. Now those are the main pieces of equipment you'll need and the trickiest to get silent, but there are a few other bits you'll need to think about. For the auto top off, a gravity fed system with a float valve is going to be your quietest bet, and Red Sea Reefers come with those as stock. However, I've chosen a Refloat ATU Pro 3, which I find very quiet. The Tunzi osmolator is probably too noisy for this application, but if you're going for a bedroom setup, you may want to set your ATO on a timer and switch it off while you're asleep. That's not ideal, but you're unlikely to lose much water to evaporation overnight, so there shouldn't be much of a swing in your salinity when it comes on in the morning, although I'd really rather avoid that if possible. And for what it's worth, I don't think the Refloat would wake me up. The noisiest part is the water trickling, and you can solve that by directing it against your sump wall. And finally, there are dosing pumps for adding things like alkalinity, calcium and magnesium. Because I use Tropic Marine All for Reef, I only need one dosing pump to take care of all three major elements. The Reef Factory dosing pumps I bought are quiet enough that they never bother me, but if you want the quietest setup possible, go for the GHL doser, which is the quietest dosing pump I've ever had. So then, will all of this guarantee you complete silence? Well, I started by taking decibel readings with a dB meter 18 inches from the tank. With all of the equipment turned on, the reading sat between 40 and 50 dBs, and with everything except for the lights turned off, it still sat between 40 and 50, but seemed to spend more time between 40 and 45, and even dipped briefly as low as 28. But that's very unscientific, and it was probably picking up noise from outside, so I'll tell you how I find it in day-to-day operation. After a few months of trial and error, I now have my system running so quiet that it doesn't disturb me while I'm working 2 feet away, and I dare say it would be quiet enough for a bedroom too. However, maintaining silence is an ongoing battle, as there is always something around the corner. I still need to adjust the gate valve every so often to stop water trickling noises. The non-return valves I've installed on my return pumps occasionally make a subtle rattling noise, and long term I'll need to commit to more maintenance, as return pumps, power heads and fans get noisy over time if you don't clean them. And it's also worth noting that I've had to make compromises in the pursuit of silence. While my filtration is doing just fine, I'd really rather have a skimmer. They're just so effective at their job, and they help keep your pH nice and high too. And while the Nero 5s are doing the job, there's not as much flow in the tank as I'd like, so instead of just turning them up to 100% like a normal person would, I'll probably have to buy 2 more and run them at 50% power, which means more expense. And of course, if you try different equipment to the stuff I've ultimately had success with, you'll probably waste a lot of money buying and replacing kit that turns out to be not as silent as some people tell you. And on that point, it's not as easy as asking for opinions on a Facebook group or a forum. As I found out firsthand, until you've had a tank in a silent room, you are not qualified to say whether aquarium equipment is truly silent. And there are various pieces of kit, including the Jecod and Tunzi pumps, that I've previously considered to be completely silent, but it turns out they're just quieter than other equipment on my main tank. But ultimately it can be done, so if you're thinking about setting up a tank like this, I say do it and see how you get on. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe for next week, and until next time, happy reefing.